Hello everyone, this is Pastor Blake, and we're continuing our study of the book of Joshua in chapter 3. Now in chapters 1, the people are getting up to the Jordan River. They're kind of staying there at the moment. You know, Moses passes away, Joshua is going to put into authority. And then chapter 2, we have Rahab and the spies. They are sent off. They realize that, yes, we can definitely take these people. They came back just like Joshua and Caleb did from back in the day when Moses was in leadership. They came back and said, yep, we are going to be able to take the city. The people are fearing before us, and Rahab the harlot even, is going to help us. And so now we have chapter 3. They're actually going to move across the Jordan at this point. Now in chapter 3 and 4 kind of go together. However, there's enough that we're still going to split these up. And so in chapter 3, we start off by seeing that in verse 1, after the spies came back, the spies that went off to Rahab, Joshua had all the people leave Shittim and go over to the Jordan. The people stayed there before crossing. And very simple, they were getting ready to cross. He was getting them to tell them what they were going to be doing. Now remember, these are millions of people at this point. This is not just like 30, 40 people or so. This is a lot of people, so a lot of momentum had to be given, a lot of instructions, and even on down the line. It would have been kind of difficult, honestly, for them to have instructed this many people. And so when it says, we're going to give them 3 days, we're going to give them 3 days, it was actually probably a little bit to get the word through all these millions of people, and then all of them to get their stuff ready to be able to cross the Jordan. So it's a little bit harder than we read it as it seems, okay? And so in verses 2 and 3, we see that after 3 days, the officers went through the camp and said, when the people see the ark coming through, carried by the priests, they are to follow them. Now, remember that in first, it was the 3 days, hey, we're going to cross the Jordan pretty soon. And then now what we see is they give them more details about what's going on. They don't just say, hey, in 3 days we're going to move. Hey, in 3 days we're going to move. But also now, whenever you see the ark passing by you, that's how you'll know when to move. And so he's given a little bit more details as they go and letting them be able to, get their stuff ready. So more details as they went. But in verse 4, we see that the people were supposed to keep a distance of 2,000 cubits. Very random number, but it does have a significance. 2,000 cubits they were supposed to be from the ark, and by this they will be shown the way to go. Now 2,000 cubits, cubits are around 18 inches as far as conversions go, and so this is about just over a half a mile. So around a half a mile is how far they were going to have to stay back. Now what do you do if you have millions of people trying to follow this one box? It's not small, but obviously 4 men could carry it. So, a few feet by a few feet wide and stuff. And so, but it was to help them, this massive group of people that was spreading out, that was all trying to get to one spot and be led. They could see it far enough ahead of them to say, oh, hey, there it is. These people wouldn't start going this way and these people wouldn't go this way. Just, hey, keep back from the ark. And so that you can see which way to go. And also, they were not instructed to touch the ark, and obviously we know in the future in biblical scriptures people did touch it and they even died. And so there was there was a respect for the ark also. So not only just stepping back so they wouldn't touch it, but also just so that they could see where they were going. And so in verses 5 and 6 we see that they were preparing their hearts and minds because God was going to work among them. Then Joshua told the priests to take the ark and to get it in front of the people. Now, we do read about, it says that they were the consecration was to take place. Let's read it. Then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourself, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And Joshua said to the priests, take up the ark of the covenant and pass on before the people. So they took up the ark of the covenant and went before the people. Now, consecration is a word that we do see throughout the Old Testament quite a bit. Now, consecration, if you look back at Exodus 19, verses 10 through 11, Exodus 19, 10 through 11, tells you a little bit about consecration, and it is somewhat of a 3-day process at times. So we do see it could have been, hey, take these 3 days because it's going to take you this amount of time to do it anyway. So he's telling them, consecrate yourself, prepare yourself, ready yourself, and so that they could cross the Jordan. They'd be ready for what God had for them when they got across the Jordan. And in verse 7, let's read. It says, then the Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. Now that's very significant. Remember, Moses is still to this day even thought about one of the best people that ever led the Jewish people. And so whenever we look at this, God really needed to do this for Joshua. Not for a prideful thing, but for simply setting up Joshua as being the true leader now of the Israelite people. Now remember, Joshua was commissioned as the leader from Moses, but we haven't really seen anything from Joshua just yet. We haven't seen too much of where God was directly communicating with him. Remember, these are millions of people that really in the Old Testament we do see God only speaking to very few select people. And so these people are just in the desert. They're wandering around. They have all their goats and their cows and all their sheep and their rams and stuff. They have their children walking around. They have to get water. They have to eat and all this stuff. So it's a lot of people, and they're just kind of waiting. They're just waiting on the man of God to speak. But they didn't know, because they didn't hear the voice of God, when he would speak. And so they're really kind of putting a lot of faith in Joshua, even though they really hadn't seen much yet from Joshua. And so God really needed to do what he was about to do in order to validate themselves before Joshua. And so that, it's very much Joshua was shown as, well, he is definitely the leader. God has his hand upon him. We're going to follow Joshua now. And so God was doing this for Joshua to exalt, so that they would trust him and they would not be a little bit disobedient like they were doing to Moses. Remember, that generation is gone. Only Caleb and Joshua were saved from that rebellious generation, because of that. They were the only two that came back and said, yeah, we can take these people. And so God is trying to boost him up in front of people's eyes so that they will also follow him. So the Lord definitely was doing that for him. But in verse 8, it says, Joshua told the priests to wade out in the Jordan with the ark and stand there. Now stand there in the middle of the river. That's basically it. Verses 9 through 13, we see that Joshua told all the people that God was going to show them. He was still guiding his people, now under Joshua, and was also going to help them drive out the other tribes from the land. When the priests entered the water, God was going to stop the water from flowing. The ark was not just a mystical box. The ark was a physical point at which God touched the earth. So just like the Red Sea, in a slightly different way, instead of Moses pointing out his, Aaron's rod, the Red Sea splitting, the Ark of the Covenant was now built. It was now with the people. And so as soon as the priests touched their feet into the water just stopped flowing and immediately just stopped up in a heap. And so we see that the same way that God was showing the Israelites out of Egypt and how he was going to guide them and protect them, he was going to do the same thing, but with a different generation. So these people had the chance to take over where the last generation failed at, which is a very big point to understand that he was doing this the same way. Say, hey, okay, now it's your turn. Are you going to disobey me? Are you going to go against me? Are you going to trust me? Are you going to rely on me? Are you going to go back on your word? What is it? And so God was doing the same thing with this generation as he was doing with the others. And also remember that the ark was not just a mystical box that God put magic on, nothing like that. However, the ark was kind of the physical point, the physical point of where God was touching the earth. Remember, he would come down with fire from heaven, and he would actually devour up the sacrifices on the ark, and he was leading them by a cloud by day and fire by night. And so this was something very, very renowned. And so this would obviously only add to more intensity of thinking it was renowned by the very box not even getting wet, the priest's feet not even getting wet. Just like in Exodus also, they were even stepping on dry ground somehow. So somehow God did that in his own above the natural, supernatural way. And so we do see that they stepped out in the river. It did stop flowing, and then they're sitting there dry. And so in verse 14 and 16 through 16, the people started toward the Jordan. When the priest's feet touched the water stopped flowing and was held back at the city of Adam beside Zarethan. Then the people passed over the Jordan. Okay. Now what we do see here is that when they came up there, it stopped as far up as Adam, which is another city. You can look it up on a map if you'd like. But whenever that is, you remember it says in verse 15, it says, now the Jordan overflows all of its bank throughout the time of harvest. Now he's making a claim. Look, this actually is a time of harvest where the water is at the deepest, the river is at the widest, but yet God still was able to do this. It wasn't something that was a natural cause. This was not a drought time frame. This was something very supernatural that God was doing. And for that, the banks was going to be overflowing at this time. And in verse 16, it says, the waters coming down from above stood up and rose up in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan. Now, this is around, took out our other study Bible to kind of get an idea of how far Adam was. And it does say it's probably around 18 miles away. So the water, even though, the people just needed to stop right there so they could pass, the water actually stopped 18 miles upstream somehow. It's known for having mudslides that would block the river every once in a while. However, we don't know if God coincidingly made a mudslide happen or whatever, but still the water, the ground underneath the river that stopped was dry. So there could be a little bit natural occurrence that God made happen at the specific time, but also there was a supernatural factor to this very miracle. Nonetheless, it was very amazing. This was the time where it said that in times of harvest, the river could be up to 10 feet deep, and also not only 10 feet deep, but up to 100 feet wide as well. So quite a nice sized river, especially a nice sized river for millions of people to cross, and it yet being dry and able to just be crossed by this people group, going into their promised land in the middle of the desert. So it would have been an amazing sight to see. And but we see that in verse 17, the priests were standing on dry ground, much like Moses and the people did after Egypt. All of the people of Israel passed over the Jordan on dry ground. This is the first time. Now, this is really interesting. I did not know this, but this is the first time Israel was ever called a nation in the Bible. Never knew that. They were always referred to as a people, like the people of Israel, but in the wilderness, but as a nation when entering the promised land. And man, what a powerful thought that is, that, when God was trying to get them to the promised land, this whole time, this lasts like 40 years in the desert, just going around in big circles and loops and just trying to get this old generation to pass over because they were not worthy. They came out of bondage. They saw the plagues. They saw the miracles, but yet, for some reason, they were not trusting in God for what they knew. God had already promised to Abraham that he would deliver him into this land. If you do not trust in the Lord with his promises, he's not obligated to give them to you like that, okay? He can give them to that next generation, and that is exactly what God was doing in this instant. He was actually allowing himself to be to be cleansed from all these other people and to get the right people in the promised land at the right time. And so as they became not just a people anymore. They were a people without a homeland. That's why we call it the wilderness as well. But now they're a people that is a nation in their promised land from God. And so next week we'll talk about chapter 4 and the stones. So kind of a long stint of crossing this river, but an amazing time. And remember the promises of God that he makes for you. If you're obedient and if you are seeking God, look, God can do some amazing things in your life, but sometimes that obedience factor is a big thing. These people were complaining, or the people before this generation were complaining that, oh, you got us out of slavery, but now you're going to let us starve in the middle of the desert. You're going to make us thirst in the middle of the desert. And God said, you know what? Then you don't deserve what I have for you. I'm going to wait till the next generation. Don't let that happen in your life. If you have the promises you know God is given to you, if you're seeking God, look, God is going to come through. But that obedience is extremely important. So always be seeking God. Pray. Read your word this week. Tell someone about the hope that you have. Blessings.